Somewhere in a workshop, a mechanic named Mat Armstrong is staring at a dead Bugatti Veyron, and he cannot fix it. That single image says a lot about the strange, tense relationship that has grown between one of the world's most famous car YouTubers and one of the world's most expensive car brands. For months, Mat Armstrong has been pulling back the curtain on Bugatti, showing his millions of viewers that some of the most jaw-dropping repair bills in the car world come down to parts that are, in truth, shared with far cheaper cars. Then, almost out of nowhere, Bugatti unveiled something completely different. It is called the Mistral Blanc Eternal, and it may be the most exclusive, most expensive, and most impossibly detailed Bugatti ever built. Only one exists. It has one owner. It will never be repeated. And the timing of its reveal, just weeks after Bugatti's reputation took a very public beating, feels like anything but an accident. This is not just a story about a new hypercar. It is a story about a company trying to answer its critics without saying a single word in an interview. It is a story about craftsmanship being used as a shield against embarrassment. And most of all, it is a story about whether a 262-year-old porcelain company can do something that engine mechanics, dealer networks, and spare parts catalogs could not. Build a Bugatti that Mat Armstrong genuinely cannot touch. Before we dig into the details of this incredible machine, it helps to understand exactly why this moment matters so much, and why a quiet car reveal suddenly feels like a loud response to months of pressure. Bugatti has spent the last year fighting battles on two fronts. On one side, its longtime business partner Porsche walked away, selling its large stake in the company and leaving Bugatti to figure out its future largely on its own. On the other side, a mechanic with a camera and a curious mind kept finding uncomfortable truths hiding under some of the most expensive paint jobs in the automotive world. Put those two pressures together, and you get a company that badly needed a win. Not a marketing win, not a clever advertisement, but something that will remind the world exactly why people pay millions of pounds for a Bugatti in the first place. The Mistral Blanc Eternal appears to be that answer. It was not announced with a press conference. There were no interviews, no statements defending the brand, no direct mention of the criticism at all. Instead, Bugatti simply revealed a breathtaking, one-of-one car and let it speak for itself. That kind of silence can mean many things. It can be confidence. It can be strategy. It can be a company that knows exactly what it is doing, or a company hoping nobody asks too many more questions. Whatever the reason, the message underneath the silence is hard to miss. While everyone was talking about airbags and cheap parts, Bugatti was quietly building something that has nothing to do with airbags or cheap parts at all. This introduction sets the stage for everything that follows. To understand why this specific car matters, you need to understand the man it seems to be answering, the pressure the brand was under, the astonishing engineering inside the machine, the extraordinary craftsmanship layered on top of it, the jaw-dropping price tag attached to it. And finally, the bigger question of whether this approach can save Bugatti's reputation for good. Each of those pieces tells part of a much larger story about pride, engineering, art, and the limits of what any camera, any wrench, or any internet investigation can ever fully expose. Before Bugatti built anything, Mat Armstrong had already changed how ordinary people think about the brand. He is a mechanic and YouTube creator known for taking apart extremely expensive and rare cars, explaining in plain language what makes them tick, and often revealing just how much of supercar's secret engineering is actually shared with much more ordinary vehicles. Bugatti became one of his favorite subjects, and it is easy to understand why. Bugatti has spent decades selling the idea that its cars are built almost entirely from scratch, using parts so special and so rare that nothing else on the road compares to them. Mat Armstrong began chipping away at that idea, piece by piece, video by video, and millions of people started paying attention. One of his most talked about discoveries involved airbags. He showed that certain Bugatti models used airbag components that were, in effect, shared with the Audi A3, a car that costs a tiny fraction of what a Bugatti costs. For many fans of the brand, that single fact felt like a crack in the mirror. If a car worth well over £1 million shares safety parts with a mainstream family hatchback, what else might be shared underneath all that carbon fiber and leather? Mat Armstrong did not stop there. He also became famous for exposing what people now simply call the 3-pound fuse. In one particularly memorable case, he showed that a gearbox problem which could have cost a Bugatti owner hundreds of thousands of pounds to fix through official channels actually came down to something as small and as cheap as a basic fuse. The kind you could buy from an ordinary parts shop for just a few pounds. That story spread fast, not just among car fans, but among everyday people who had never even seen a Bugatti in person. It painted a picture of a brand charging enormous sums for repairs that, at least in some cases, did not need to cost anywhere near that much. On top of the airbags and the fuse, Mat Armstrong also highlighted the wider truth that Bugatti, like many hypercar brands, has long been part of the massive Volkswagen Group family of companies. That connection is not exactly a secret, but seeing it laid out clearly, part by part, hit differently for many buyers. Some wealthy Bugatti owners began speaking publicly about their frustration, with a few even suggesting that modern Bugattis were, underneath the badge and the price tag, little more than Volkswagens wearing an extremely expensive disguise. For a brand built entirely on the idea of being untouchable, one of kind, and beyond comparison, that kind of criticism cuts deep. It does not just annoy a marketing department. It threatens the entire reason people are willing to spend millions of pounds on a single car. Mat Armstrong's approach never felt like an attack for the sake of drama. He is a mechanic first, and his videos are built around genuine curiosity and real technical explanation rather than outrage. That is exactly what made his findings so powerful. He was not shouting accusations. He was calmly showing people, part by part, what he found underneath the surface, and letting viewers draw their own conclusions. For Bugatti, a brand whose entire value depends on mystery, exclusivity, and a feeling that nothing else compares to it, that calm, methodical honesty may have been more damaging than any angry review ever could be. It set the stage perfectly for whatever Bugatti chose to do next, because the world was now watching closely, waiting to see how a company built on secrecy would respond to a mechanic determined to show everyone exactly how the engine really works. While Mat Armstrong was busy pulling back the curtain on Bugatti's parts bin, something even bigger was happening in the background of the company itself. Porsche, which had owned a very large stake in Bugatti for years, made a decision to walk away completely, selling its share of the business and stepping back from day-to-day involvement in the brand. On paper, this might sound like a simple business decision, the kind of thing that happens quietly in corporate boardrooms every year. In reality, for a brand like Bugatti, it landed at one of the worst possible moments. Here was a company already facing tough questions about shared parts and repair costs, now also losing one of its major financial partners and, in many ways, one of its symbols of stability. When two difficult stories collide like that, they tend to feed off each other. Every new criticism about parts sharing suddenly felt connected to a bigger question. Was Bugatti in trouble? And was this the beginning of a much larger identity crisis of brand? It is worth pausing here to understand a bit of Bugatti's history, because it helps explain why this moment felt so significant. The modern version of Bugatti, as most people know it today, was revived back in 1998, brought back to life under the Volkswagen Group umbrella after decades of the original company being dormant. That revival gave Bugatti access to enormous engineering resources, deep pockets, and shared technology across the wider group of brands, which is exactly how cars like the legendary Veyron and Chiron became possible in the first place. For years, that arrangement worked beautifully. Buyers were happy to pay enormous sums for cars that pushed the absolute limits of speed and engineering, and few people asked too many questions about where individual components came from. But once Mat Armstrong started showing specific, easy-to-understand examples, like a shared airbag or an inexpensive fuse, that quiet arrangement suddenly felt less like clever engineering efficiency and more like something buyers were not being told clearly enough. With Porsche's exit, Bugatti now finds itself operating with more independence than it's had in years, guided by Chief Executive Mate Rimac, and a new group of investors who took on a larger role in the company's direction. That independence is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gives Bugatti the freedom to define its own future, rather than always being seen as one piece of a much larger corporate puzzle. On the other hand, it means the brand no longer has the safety net of a partner like Porsche standing behind it, at exactly the moment its reputation needed the most support. Against that backdrop, silence became a strategy. Rather than issuing statements defending its parts choices or explaining its pricing structure in detail, Bugatti chose to let a new car do the talking. That decision fits a pattern many luxury brands follow when they feel cornered. Instead of arguing point by point with critics, they attempt to change the entire conversation by producing something so remarkable that the previous criticism starts to feel small by comparison. Whether or not that strategy actually works depends heavily on what the new car turns out to be, and whether it genuinely represents something different, or whether it simply distracts attention for a little while before the same questions return. This tension between exposure and reinvention is exactly the backdrop the Mistral Blanc Eternal walked into, and explains why so many people immediately connected the timing of its reveal to the ongoing story involving Mat Armstrong. It also helps to remember that Bugatti is not the first ultra-luxury brand to face this kind of test. Whenever a company built on mystery gets too much of its inner workings exposed to daylight, it usually has two choices: fight back loudly and argue every point in public, or go quiet and let a new creation carry the weight of the response instead. A stunning new creation gives fans, journalists, and casual viewers something completely fresh to talk about, admire, and share. In many ways, Porsche's exit gave Bugatti both a painful problem and a strange kind of freedom at the very same time. Freedom to stop explaining itself and simply start building again. When Bugatti finally lifted the covers off the Mistral Blanc Eternal, there was no big stage, no dramatic press conference, and no spokesperson standing at a podium explaining why the car existed. That absence of noise was, in its own way, incredibly loud. After months of public criticism, shared parts revelations, and uncomfortable questions from wealthy customers, many people expected some kind of official response from Bugatti's leadership. Instead, the company simply revealed a stunning, one-of-a-kind hypercar and let people form their own opinions. There was no mention of Mat Armstrong by name, no direct rebuttal of the airbag story or the fuse story, and no attempt to argue that the earlier criticism was unfair. In many ways, that silence felt more powerful than any argument could have been. It suggested a level of confidence, as if Bugatti was saying, without actually saying it, that this car alone was proof enough of what the brand is truly capable of. Choosing to let the car do the talking is a classic move among luxury brands facing public pressure, but only works if the product genuinely lives up to the moment, and that is where the Mistral Blanc Eternal becomes so interesting. The name itself gives a hint of what makes this car so different from anything Bugatti has built before. Blanc Eternal translates loosely to eternal white, and that phrase turns out to be far more meaningful than a simple paint color once you understand what the car actually represents. This is not just another special edition with a unique shade and a few extra badges. It is a car built almost like a piece of fine art, created through a partnership that has never been attempted in Bugatti's history. Rather than working with another car manufacturer or a typical part supplier, Bugatti chose to collaborate with a royal porcelain manufacturer with roots stretching back more than 2.5 centuries. That decision alone tells you that Bugatti was not simply trying to build a faster or more powerful car this time. It was trying to build something that could not be measured, compared, or criticized using the same tools Mat Armstrong had used before. You cannot look up a porcelain sculpture in a parts catalog. You cannot find a cheaper equivalent for centuries of hand craftsmanship. And you certainly cannot argue that hand-painted artwork, created stroke by a master artisan, is secretly the same as something found on a mainstream family car. By choosing this direction, Bugatti effectively stepped outside the entire argument that had been causing it so much trouble. Instead of trying to convince people that its mechanical parts were more special than critics claimed, it built a car whose value rests almost entirely somewhere else altogether in craftsmanship, history, and artistic rarity rather than in engineering alone. Whether that approach fully answers a criticism is a fair question to debate, but there is no denying it was a clever way to change the terms of the conversation. Instead of defending old ground, Bugatti simply moved the entire discussion to new territory where its harshest critics would have a much harder time following. It is a bit like watching a chess player who, instead of defending a weak piece under attack, calmly moves the whole game to a different part of the board where that weak piece no longer matters. The critics can still talk about airbags and fuses if they want to, but now those conversations sit next to headlines about hand-painted porcelain and a 260-year-old royal workshop. And the second story is simply more exciting to read, watch, and share. That is not necessarily dishonest. It is simply smart timing paired with genuine, verifiable craftsmanship, and it shows that Bugatti's leadership understood exactly what kind of story would capture public attention at the exact moment the brand needed a new headline the most. Underneath all the artistry and symbolism, the Mistral Blanc Eternal is still, at its heart, a Bugatti And that means it comes with genuinely staggering engineering credentials. Power comes from the brand's legendary 8-liter quad-turbocharged W16 engine, the same extraordinary power plant that has defined Bugatti's identity for more than 2 decades. This particular version marks the final road-going car ever built with that engine, which adds an enormous amount of significance to the Mistral Blanc Eternal beyond its artistic details alone. It is not just visually unique, it is mechanically historic, representing the last chapter of an engine story that helped make Bugatti a household name among car enthusiasts around the world. In terms of raw numbers, the engine produces an incredible 1,578 horsepower, translating to around 1,600 metric horsepower, sent through a 7-speed dual-clutch transmission designed to handle that kind of extreme output smoothly and reliably. Acceleration figures are almost hard to fully picture in real terms. The car can sprint from a standstill to 62 miles per hour in just 2.4 seconds, a number that would feel violent in almost any other vehicle, but is simply expected from a modern Bugatti hypercar. Top speed is electronically limited to 273 miles per hour, a figure that exists mostly to remind people what the car is capable of rather than something most owners will ever actually experience on public roads. These numbers alone would make headlines on their own, even without any of the porcelain artistry layered on top. It is worth remembering that being the final W16 power road car ever built is not a small detail. For collectors and enthusiasts, the last of something often becomes far more valuable and meaningful than the newest of something, especially with an engine as iconic and characterful as Bugatti's W16. Where other manufacturers have moved toward hybrid systems, smaller turbocharged engines, or fully electric powertrains, Bugatti chose to send